there, welcome to the Soil and Roots podcast, cultivating deep discipleship in community. I'm Brian Fisher. This is episode 13.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
We've reached the end of season 1 of the Soil and Roots podcast. I'm so thankful you've come along for this journey into deep discipleship so far. Whether you're listening on your own, with your family and friends, or with your greenhouse, I'm just glad you're here. Today, we're going to wrap up this season by crystallizing what we've uncovered so far and setting the stage for Season 2. Though most of us started with Episode 1 and are listening in or reading in numerical order, I occasionally get feedback from a few of you who have a habit of checking out random episodes out of order. You're like the people who start a novel in the middle of the book, and I pray for you. The podcast is actually designed to be listened to sequentially because new episodes build on material from previous episodes and later seasons build on this season. Soil and Roots as an organization is committed to cultivating deep discipleship. That's the journey of exploring the hidden ideas that shape us and the culture. So we help form and support small intentional communities we call greenhouses. So along with those of you listening on your own, greenhouses are also working through the themes and ideas and seasons in a progressive journey into the depths of discipleship. The podcast explores various aspects of our spiritual journey from somewhat non-traditional perspectives, so it's perfectly okay to take your time working through the material. The material is evergreen. When we enter the realm of ideas and kingdoms, anthropology, assumptions, deep discipleship, it's good to just let some things marinate, to test them, to debate them. We're making claims and asking pivotal questions about Christ and modern Christianity, the institution of the church, our stories, and life in general that we usually don't find in our churches. I think the consequences of not asking these types of questions are disastrous. But on the flip side, if we take these questions seriously and are willing to go where the answers lead, we may see the kingdom of light advance in some very exciting, visible ways, starting in our own hearts and lives. So let's sum up Season 1 and get ourselves ready for Season 2, which is all about how we discover the hidden ideas in our hearts. The primary premise of the podcast is that modern Christianity is deeply confused about some fundamental aspects of the faith. We're operating from some wrong assumptions about Jesus and discipleship. The West is facing the Great Omission, the absence of a focus on producing people who are becoming more like Jesus, who think like he thinks, who relate like he relates, who give like he gives, who desire what he desires. A genuine disciple is someone who is apprenticing with Jesus for the purpose of becoming more like him. It's a lifelong journey of character formation, but it's one that should give us some basis for answering yes to this pivotal question. Am I more like Jesus than I was 5 years ago? If the primary purpose of the institutional church is character formation, is that even what's happening there? On this podcast, we've gone one step deeper and proposed that this spiritual formation happens as the ideas in our hearts are progressively formed from those of the kingdom of darkness to those of the kingdom of light. Ideas are these often unconscious, powerful assumptions that govern how we operate in the world. So understanding, exploring, and learning to discern these ideas has been really the focus of Season 1. And we call this journey deep discipleship. Deep discipleship is what's been omitted from the modern conception of the Great Omission. Some of these ideas, these hidden assumptions, are so deeply embedded in our churches, our institutions, and our hearts that we normally don't even give them a second thought. But these assumptions are causing some really terrible downstream hurt and harm. And as our culture continues to decline and flounder, the church is in danger of becoming impotent and inconsequential, not only to itself, but to the rest of society. And we certainly don't want that to be the case. We've looked at a few harmful results of these wrong assumptions, the divorce and the abortion rates among Christians, and the fall-off rate of so-called conversions. Most researchers claim that devout Christians are less likely to divorce than other populations, which is good. The bad news is the divorce rate may still be as high as 30% among Christians. Though some outlets celebrate that Christians divorce less than non-Christians, I don't think we should get excited about a potential 1 in 3 Christian marriages ending in divorce. Divorce should be extremely rare in Christian populations, not something that has become so normalized that many of us don't even give it a second thought. Abortion data in the church is even more sobering. According to a recent Lifeway research study, 7 in 10 women who have had an abortion identify as Christian. closely mirroring the overall religious makeup of the U.S. That last phrase means that Lifeway's research looks a lot like other groups like Pew, which suggests that somewhere between 65 and 70% of Americans still consider themselves to be Christian. As being a Christian becomes less and less popular in our current climate, I think we'll see that number drop. Claiming to be Christian and actually being a disciple of Jesus can be two very different things. Still, the Lifeway research went on to note that when asked specifically if they identify as an evangelical Christian, 16% of all women who've had an abortion say yes. Specifically, among self-identified Christian women who've had abortions, 23% say they're evangelical. These are staggeringly high numbers. Many of us consider our local church to be influential on the 7 mountains of culture, including family. So, does the local church have an influence on the abortion rate? Quote, only 7% of women who had abortions said they directly spoke with someone in their church about their decision. For 3 in 4 women, 76%, local churches had no influence on their decision. End quote. There's a whole lot we can say about the marriage and abortion rates in the church, but if people apprenticing at the feet of Jesus are to look more and more like him, why are as many as 1/3 of our marriages ending in divorce and so many pregnancies ending in abortion? I don't think we need to look much beyond those 2 measurements to conclude that the modern Christian community is flailing. Why? Well, because how Christians view and honor the bedrock relationship of civilization, and how Christians view and honor the value of innocent human life, tells us all we need to know about the core ideas in our collective Christian hearts. And these statistics strongly suggest American Christians have very wrong ideas of identity, anthropology, value, power, purpose, and love deep in their hearts. In other words, the Great Omission is real, and we're struggling to make deep disciples. We've also touched on modern Christianity's zeal to produce converts versus making disciples. In our quest to save souls, we've lost the Great Commission and its command to make disciples. God loves you and has a plan for your life is not the gospel. It's a poor used car sales pitch. Evangelist Ray Comfort claims that 80 to 90% of people who make a so-called profession of faith aren't actually followers of Christ. Dr. D. James Kennedy once said, the vast majority of people who are members of churches in America today aren't Christians. I say that without the slightest fear of contradiction. I base it on empirical evidence of 24 years of examining thousands of people. A.W. Tozer said, it is my opinion that tens of thousands, if not millions, have been brought into some kind of religious experience by accepting Christ, and they have not been saved. Yet how many churches publicize the number of people who, quote, make a decision for Christ, or pray some version of a sinner's prayer? I've asked a few evangelicals why they're so intent on reporting decisions for Jesus, rather than reporting on the number of disciples of Jesus. I was told that it's difficult to determine someone's heart. Let the irony of that response sink in. But behind these high-level statistics are other pressing questions. Of the Christian marriages that don't end in a divorce, how many truly reflect the relationship between Christ and his church? Meaning, how many Christian marriages are just clocking time, and how many accurately portray the love, the sacrifice, and the flourishing of the divine picture of marriage? What does pornography use look like among Christians? How about sex before or outside of marriage? If the abortion rate is so high, what ideas are driving the sexual ethics that are leading to pregnancies in the first place? What wrong assumptions have invaded the church that are leading to so much death? If sharing the gospel is more than sharing a few Bible verses and asking someone to repeat a prayer, what is it? And which gospel are we talking about? The gospel of the kingdom, or a version that boils down Jesus to my own personal savior who otherwise has little relevance until I'm dead? How are we talking about Christianity in the culture? Are we being realistic about what it is and what it isn't? C.S. Lewis said, I didn't go to religion to make me happy. I always knew a bottle of port would do that. If you want a religion to make you feel real comfortable, I certainly don't recommend Christianity. To address the downstream results of divorce and abortion and false conversions, we need to go back upstream. We need to ask some pivotal questions about American life, the American church, and yes, our own hearts, our own spiritual formation. We started Season 1 by articulating the problem, the Great Omission, the lack of genuine disciple-making in modern Christianity. At an individual level, this results in a sense of being disconnected from God and from others and ourselves. and we have all but lost the relationship we're supposed to have with creation and culture. We sense there should be more to the Christian life, but we're not quite sure what that actually means. And here we've proposed a solution: deep discipleship. We become more like Jesus through the progressive transformation of generally unconscious ideas and desires in our hearts. Sounds great that we've admitted that the average Western lifestyle and most of the modern church doesn't really create the space and environment for this type of deep discipleship. Of the 6 stages of our spiritual journey, the average church only deals with the first 3. We're sort of on our own after that. In order to better visualize how deep discipleship works, we looked at the first of our visual aids, the creation picture. You can find all of the visual aids for free on our website. The creation picture shows that we exist in the cosmos, that's the outer circle. That's all of creation, the natural order. We participate in and are integrated with the 7 mountains of culture in the background: family, education, government, business, arts and entertainment, media, and church. Culture is continually promoting and persuading us to accept its ideas. We call these ideas in the air. Of the 7 mountains, the most powerful by far in our spiritual formation is family, particularly our family of origin. The tree in the middle of the picture is you. You're a lovely tree. You're in relationship with lots of other people, represented by the other trees around you. The core of who you are is your heart. Your heart is the center. It's the seat of your ideas and desires. Your heart in the picture is your roots, and your roots are planted in soil. The soil represents the ideas that drive and govern us: soil and roots. The creation picture shows us that we exist in 4 relationships. We have a relationship with the invisible creator of the picture, and we have relationships with other people, with ourselves, and with creation and culture. All 4 of these relationships were broken by sin. Most Christians acknowledge that. What many Christians aren't so sure about is if all 4 are being reconciled through Jesus today. Most followers agree that our relationship with the Creator has been repaired, but we don't spend too much time thinking about Jesus' impact on the other 3. That led us into our exploration of the idea of the gospel. What are our assumptions about the word gospel? Is the gospel only about our relationship with God, or is it the gospel of the kingdom? The gospel of the kingdom is a very, very big deal, but it's something we hear very little about in our modern Christianity. But to have context for our spiritual formation, we need to regain a deep understanding of the kingdom. If we're to become more like Jesus, we need to know him not only as Savior, but as the ruling king, and come to grips with what this kingdom is all about. As we've explored the idea of the gospel, we realize our modern era has distilled the gospel of the kingdom down to something less than what it actually is. And we briefly explored an idea of expectation. In our current era, what's the prevailing idea of how the world is going? Is the world winding up prior to the end of the age? Or is it winding down? Or something else? And how do our unconscious ideas of expectation impact the way we operate in the world today? If we tend towards Christian fatalism, that's the idea that the world must inevitably come to some form of destruction prior to the end of the age, what does that mean for our relationship with creation and culture? If our idea is that the world is heading towards a destructive end, it makes sense that our focus is on evangelism and relief efforts. We want others to escape a bad body and a bad earth. Though, how do we reconcile that with the cultural commission's charge to rule and reign the earth? How do we reconcile that with the gospel of the kingdom, the reconciliation of all things? Have we just forgotten the kingdom? Well, then we tackled a few ideas of anthropology, what it means to be human. If you want to brush up on ideas of anthropology, check out the picture On Being Human on the website. Most of us are born into the idea that humans are largely formed through instruction. Though, is theologian James K.A. Smith correct when he concludes that modern Christianity has made a terribly destructive conclusion that we are transformed solely through the intake of information in our minds? That if we attend enough services, go to enough Bible studies, agree to enough doctrine, listen to enough podcasts, we are formed by intellectually agreeing to certain facts? Or are we missing the location of genuine transformation by about 18 inches? Certainly we agree that our minds are engaged. The ideas of light are objectively true. We need to form a Christian worldview, a set of beliefs that help us frame the world. Those beliefs are rational and they are consistent across our personal relationships and all of creation and culture. The Christian worldview is the only worldview on the planet that actually holds together in our creation picture. But does that truth always seep into our soils? Or is there more to discipleship than simply agreeing to or accumulating certain facts? We discover that the biblical model for spiritual formation actually consists of not one, but 5 key elements: time, habit, community, intimacy, and instruction. Yet we've discovered that the modern Christian experience doesn't normally involve all 5 of these elements. Most of us aren't part of immersive communities designed to form our character to be more like Jesus. Most of us sort of dart in and out of Christian rituals while we juggle lots of other different communities. These 5 elements aren't really part of our daily or even weekly rhythms. Our spiritual formation occurs through much more than instruction. It occurs through relationship, our 4 relationships with God, others, ourselves, and creation. And in most cases, our heart formation occurs progressively. It takes time for many of these ideas of darkness in our hearts to bend towards the light. Our hearts may be changed abruptly in one direction or the other. Our salvation is often an abrupt change of ideas towards light through divine intervention, and our hearts may turn towards ideas of darkness abruptly through trauma or tragedy and harm. We may break a bone suddenly, but it takes weeks, if not months, for that fracture to heal. Our hearts generally work the same way. Our ideas of identity or value or purpose may be corrupted in an instant as the result of someone wounding us, but it takes time, life-giving habits, appropriate intimacy with trusted people who seek our good, a vibrant community, and often repeated instruction for our hearts to embrace ideas of light, if we allow them. Because our spiritual formation occurs primarily in our earliest years, we will struggle to understand the ideas in our hearts now unless we do the hard work of understanding our story from the beginning. Your family of origin and early interactions with others is the incubator in which your spirit was formed. That's where time and habit and intimacy, community, and instruction deeply influence very young, very supple hearts. And if we go through life unconscious or uncaring of the ideas that were formed then, we'll inevitably transpose those ideas onto our 4 relationships now, for better or for worse. And here we may find ourselves in a dilemma. If discipleship means we're on a journey to become more like Jesus, that means we should know him really well, including his kingdom, but it also requires us to understand ourselves well, our hearts. A critical component of our spiritual formation is digging into the ideas in our hearts by engaging our stories, including the hurt and the harm and the wounds that occurred in our families of origin and early life experiences. Wait a second, in order to move forward, I may need to look backward? Is that the picture of discipleship we're used to in our modern experience? Have we been taught that our journey to become more like Jesus is dependent on exploring and discovering our own history? Well, maybe, but maybe not. Many of us have experiences where contemplation and digging into our own stories is frowned on and labeled as navel-gazing or selfish and certainly unnecessary. Yet, this is one of the reasons why it's possible to have the world's best doctrine, the most intellectual apologetics, and memorize entire books of the Bible, and still have very wrong ideas in our soil. We can live very Christian lives with corrupted ideas of darkness that distort all 4 of our relationships. And the reason is because genuine discipleship requires uncovering the ideas that power us, and those are formed primarily through relationships and experience. In other words, through our stories. This is why understanding our stories all the way back to their beginnings is such an essential foundation of genuine discipleship. We may well be governed by ideas that are contrary to the kingdom of God even after sitting in Bible-believing churches for decades. But if we find ourselves in environments where exploring our own hearts and stories is demeaned or degraded or ignored, we are in fact in a dilemma. We may well get stuck in our spiritual journey. Well, I've just sneakily laid out the outline for the next 3 seasons of Soil and Roots. I've just shared the 3 major obstacles to our journey to become more like Jesus, and we're going to explore them in detail along with the solutions to these challenges. At Soil and Roots, we call these obstacles the 3 primary problems. So problem number 1, if discipleship is a journey of character formation to become more like Jesus, we need to know him really well. However, we live in an age that seems to ignore Jesus' primary message and the overarching theme of the Bible, his kingdom. We live in an age of the forgotten kingdom. Problem number 2, this journey of formation requires us to know Jesus well, but we also need to know ourselves well. An essential aspect of deep discipleship is exploring our individual stories in order to discern the ideas and desires in our hearts. And many of us have no safe, secure environment in which to do that, in which to explore our stories. And the modern church doesn't normally acknowledge this as vital. So we face a discipleship dilemma. And problem 3, if deep discipleship happens best in cultures that intentionally embrace the 5 key elements of any human formative experience, do we have access to these types of communities? Are we invited into small, immersive groups of people intentionally wanting to become more like Jesus? Groups exploring who Jesus is, including his kingdom, and create space and time to explore our own stories? Well, if we don't have access to these specific communities, we live in a gap, a formation gap. So there you have it, the 3 primary problems, the 3 major obstacles to our spiritual formation and major causes of the Great Omission: the forgotten kingdom, the discipleship dilemma, and the formation gap. The next 3 seasons will dig into each of these and most happily propose solutions to them so that we can actually resolve the Great Omission once and for all. We're going to start with the second primary problem, the discipleship dilemma. That's the subject of season 2. If becoming more like Jesus means uncovering the ideas in our hearts, how do we do that? How do we explore our stories, our relationships, our history, our experiences in order to determine what's going on in our hearts? Well, we touched on this journey a bit earlier this season. The great news is God has provided signposts for us to evaluate ideas of darkness and light in our hearts. We call them the 8 indicators, and they point us down to the things our hearts embrace. And we call this process of evaluating our indicators heart view. The problem is the discipleship dilemma. A part of the solution is learning how to practice heart view in safe, intentional, small communities. Season 2, it's going to be wonderful. It's a great exploration of how we can learn to discern the ideas and desires in our hearts, and I hope you're as excited about it as I am. Thanks for listening to Season 1. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, would you mind giving it a great rating on your favorite podcast platform? Great ratings mean more listeners and viewers, and we need to reach as many people as possible. For more information, check out soilandroots.org, and we'd love to hear from you. So email us at fish@soilandroots.org, and we'll see you next time as we get started on Season 2.